Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Seasons Ebb and Flow for the season of divorce and beyond. I'm Lee Wright, a divorce coach, and today's interview is with Don Mall. He is a certified divorce lending professional, otherwise known as a CDLP, and he's going to be answering questions that relate to buying out your spouse with a house, getting a mortgage, all the things that relate to homes with divorce. So I'm going to turn it over to Don to tell us just a little bit about his background.
The clean background, right?
Yeah.
So, so thanks for having me, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here. And when we were preparing here, a little pre-brief, I was asking how long you want to go because I can talk about this for a long time. So my background has been in the financial services industry the last 25 years, and in the capacity of financial advisement, banking, and lending. The last 5 years have been dedicated exclusively to divorce mortgage planning. And it was uh, learning about the Divorce Lending Association and serving what I identified as a very underserved market, and that is the divorcing homeowner. So that's what led me to your podcast today.
Yes. So can you explain what is a CDLP?
Sure. So it's another acronym that people have on their business cards, but it stands for the Certified Divorce Lending Professional. And I'm asked that every week. What is a CDLP? And it's very similar to for those who are going to go speaking to, say, their family lawyer for their divorce. They're going to go speak to a family lawyer because that family lawyer has not only passed the bar, but has advanced training, practical experience, and a unique skill set unique to the divorce process, as opposed to maybe someone at a personal injury or a probate firm, different skill set. When it comes to lending, most people say, "Oh, I'll have a mortgage professional. I've been working with this lender for years," which I understand that. But it's interesting because and I love our story, and that is, and it kind of correlates. I didn't realize, Lee, I didn't know this till last year, that it wasn't until 1974 when women in this country could open up a bank account or get a line of credit without a man co-signing.
Yes.
And I didn't know that. And so it wasn't until 1978 where a group of women led by Carol Green, and there were 7 of them. Carol Green was the lead one, where they said, you know what, shame on the banking industry because they've been serving only half the population.
Yeah.
So we're going to be the solution. So they created and founded the first women's bank. It was called the Women's Bank, and they opened July 14th, 1978 in downtown Denver. And when they opened up their doors, there was a line down the street, and over $1 million, which is the equivalent of 5 million today, was deposited.
Wow.
So I share that story because it's similar to ours. And it was a mortgage originator and an accounting professional by background, a woman by the name of Jody Bruns. So another woman. Are you picking up a pattern here? So she was going through her divorce, and as a mortgage originator, and this was in about 2000, she realized, oh my God, shame on the mortgage industry, because we are trained as loan originators and loan officers to help the couple when they buy the home or
Mhm.
when they do a traditional refinance. But there are so many different aspects that are being overlooked. And by overlooking these different aspects, I'm being harmed as
Mhm.
a divorcing homeowner. And those different areas that are involved, it's not just take a loan application, pull your financial information, get your tax returns, what's your income, I'm going to run your credit, tell you how much you're qualified for. That's mortgage origination.
Yeah.
Now we are saying, hey, listen, we are dividing our assets. Now, am I going to be able to be qualified to keep the home? So it's not just mortgage origination, but it's the family law component. The
Mhm.
family law component is where oftentimes things get muddy, and language that's in the marital settlement agreement will conflict with the client or the spouse looking to retain or purchase a home, whether that's a refinance, an equity buyout, or the purchase. Then we've got the financial and tax planning component of it, because again, now we're dividing assets. So maybe there's a retirement account. Before we've got these retirement accounts, and those are used towards mortgage origination. Now we're dividing that. Now there's going to have to be a court order to divide that. Can we use that for qualifying assets? Sometimes, sometimes not. Then there's tax implications. You're going to be selling the home. What kind of tax implications are potentially going to be exposed to? Then we've got the real property itself, the marital home, because there's aspects of the marital home that oftentimes are overlooked that are very detrimental and has nothing to do with the mortgage. And it
Mm,
actually has a lot to do with whether they're going to retain the home and what type of financing they're going to be eligible for or not eligible for. And then there's the mortgage originating itself. And believe it or not, there's guidelines that your traditional mortgage originators, it's beyond their purview because they're just not trained or focused. They're focused on the other aspect of the business. So
mm,
that's when Jody Bruns said, okay, I'm going to be, here's, God forbid, someone goes through this like I am. So she said, just like Carol Green did, and the women said, we're going to serve this underserved market. She said, I'm going to be the solution. So she created the Divorce Lending Association. And
huh,
with that, she created a curriculum where loan officers like me can go through this curriculum and earn that certified divorce lending professional designation. So, and I learned, I said I did about the last 5 years has been focused on this is because when I heard another loan officer talking about, oh yeah, divorce lending, I said, whoa, what'd you just say? And they said, oh, there's a program you can get in divorce lending. And unfortunately, I'm a divorce survivor myself, and I learned painfully um, the mistakes. And my mistakes were significant financially, and including credit scores that where I was impacted negatively. So when I learned about it, I said, what's this all about? And I learned about Jody Bruns. I said, boy, if that's not the universe tapping me on the shoulder saying, hey, Don, this is where you got to go. So,
right.
so that's a short answer long. What is a CDLP?
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. I knew about women needing co-signing in the 70s, but I did not realize that the CDLP was actually pretty recent in the history of recognizing that this was an area that really a divorce is so complicated and it
Mhm.
affects so many areas of your life. And it's not just splitting of assets, but tax implications and all the different pieces. And it's so helpful. Sometimes, especially you're so overwhelmed, there's so much information coming at you during a divorce. Having the right professionals to guide you just makes such a difference.
Oh, it's information overload. And I've been there, and your mind's just in a different state,
Yeah.
and absorbing information isn't at least for me, it wasn't what it was, and I remember looking, an attorney gave me a homework list, and I got in my car, I just put it down, I'm like, I don't even want to touch that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do understand that aspect of it, but it's just and Lee, you don't know how many times, because I go all over the state. So to give you some context, there's roughly 9,000 licensed loan originators in the state of Florida. When I say licensed loan originators, there's really three primary places you get a mortgage. One is in a commercial bank. So you walk into your commercial banks on Main Street, USA, talk to one of the mortgage professionals, and you can get the mortgage. The second place is an independent mortgage bank. Unlike commercial banks that have a variety of services, independent mortgage banks strictly underwrite and fund mortgages. And then the third would be a mortgage broker. The broker represents both the independent mortgage banks and the commercial banks. So of those 9,000 in Florida, I think we have only 28 who have gone through the curriculum to earn the CDLP. And of those 28, only one has limited their practice exclusively to helping divorcing homeowners. Lee, I'll give you two guesses who that is, but you should probably only need one.
Yeah.
With that, I do go all over the states, and I lead by education, and that starts with the divorce attorneys. And they hear me say this, hey, what is a legal option isn't necessarily a mortgage option. And
Mm.
so in fact, it was January, and this doesn't stop there. It's at the bench as well. So in January, I'd given us attorneys need continuing legal education credits
Right.
or CLEs. So I've been giving CLE lectures. Last year, I think I gave 16 CLE lectures across the state. This year, I've done 9. Um, but it was 2 years ago. I was giving a CLE lecture in Palm Beach, South Palm Beach County in Delray. There's, if you know Delray, I think you're in Boca now, but Delray
Yeah.
and McAvenue, the courthouse is right there on the south side of the avenue. And so I was given the CLE, and during one particular section, I was talking about support income, alimony, child support, and utilizing for mortgage qualification. There's 3 women in the back, and their hands went up, and they're all peppering me with questions. And I thought, well, at least I'm not putting everybody to sleep here. And it was a couple weeks later where the Palm Beach County Bar Association had their holiday event, and I walked in this room, and there's about 175 who had registered for it. Walk in this big ballroom. The first 3 people I see are these 3 women. They're like, "Hey, you're that divorce mortgage guy." I thought, uh-oh, what I do? And they came over to me and they said, "Hey, we're judges and we were at your lecture a couple of weeks ago." I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "You look kind of familiar." And the one judge, I gave her a lot of credit. She said, "I realized after attending your lecture that I had just signed off on orders that morning, and there was no way the wife was going to be able to effectuate that equity buyout. Can you come train us?" So that started the wheels. And so it was just January of this year when the Florida Supreme Court accredited us to give continuing judicial education for the judges. So I've now started doing that. So I did it for the 9th and 18th district, which is Orlando, and I guess that's Volusia or Seminole County. And the judges themselves were saying, okay, we didn't know this. And it's not, and people say, "My God, I can't believe a judge doesn't know it, or an attorney doesn't know it." It's not their job.
Mm-mm.
Their job is to navigate the law.
Right.
That's it. That's why they'll bring in other allied professionals,
Mm.
like CPA, or if they're going to be imputing income, they'll bring in a vocational expert or a divorce coach. They're going to
Right.
bring in other subject matter experts into the process because their role is just to navigate the law.
Yeah. That's excellent. I think it's so important for professionals to help each other and educate each other because, yeah, you know your area but they all are symbiotic. And so ensuring that or knowing when to bring in that outside professional is also, you have to know that that outside professional is there and understand when is even the right time.
Right.
So it's great that the education's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if a client comes to you, when you start talking to them, what are some of the types of questions that you ask them that they need to be like thinking about as they are considering their options?
Well, again, when the process cannot be more opposite, because when they've worked with a traditional mortgage originator, and there's a lot of excitement. Hey, we're buying our first home, our marital home, or maybe we're right sizing to whatever that is. So typically what happens is if they're starting the divorce process, there's a lot of reflection. Do I want to keep this home?
Yeah,
And many times I'll hear, well, for the stability of the children, the neighborhood, the schools, the friends.
right.
Um, and I always ask the question, first of all, I said, well, let's stop there for a minute. When you say stability, what do you mean by that? Are
Mhm.
you referring to the roof over their head, that the same roof, or children's activities cost money? I know they're not cheap. And so do you mean stability with the lifestyle that the children are accustomed to?
Mhm.
Because there's a mortgage payment, but then there's holding costs associated with that. And then do you want to live? What kind of lifestyle do you want to live?
Exactly.
So let's do some reflection there first. And and then um, there's a process that I go through. And you got to understand, when they come to me, they're not in mortgage origination mode. They're
Right.
nowhere near filling out a mortgage application. They're in
Sure.
divorce mortgage planning mode.
Yes.
So they're not coming to me as Don, the mortgage originator. They're coming to me as Don, the divorce mortgage guy, because if they're going to be utilizing my services, it's a fiduciary relationship, meaning that it's strictly solution based.
Mhm.
My compensation isn't based on the outcome of a particular divorce case, meaning that they're going to do a mortgage or they're going to buy a new home and there's a commission. That's not my model. It's strictly, okay, what does the landscape look like? And that includes, okay, let's talk about your marital home. What's the value? How do you come up with that value? There's different valuation processes. Commonly, it's either a marital appraisal or they'll have a local realtor perform what's called a comparative market analysis, or a CMA. Both of those are valid valuation methods, but both valuation methods have gaps. Both gaps need to be addressed because those gaps can cost, and I've seen it, tens of thousands of dollars that weren't picked up by either the CMA or the appraiser.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about the titling of the home. Are you on the title? Are you not on the title? Because that in itself will determine what type of financing, if you are going to retain the marital home or not. Oftentimes that titling will be changed during the divorce process, and that can shut the door on one of the ideal financing mortgage loans. We're going to talk about the homeowner's insurance. Believe it or not, I don't know national statistics. I started tracking this in 2023. There was a case up in Pensacola, Escambia County, back in the 80s that unfortunately kind of went not as noticed as it should. But because that couple that got divorced failed to address the homeowner's insurance aspect of it, the retaining spouse was left uncovered, and unfortunately a fire destroyed the property and the claim was denied. So I always ask my clients, I need to see a copy of your homeowner's insurance declaration page. And typically, Lee, they'll say, what does this have to do with the mortgage? I'll say, absolutely nothing. And so again, I don't know national statistics, but since 2023, I was involved in 178 divorce cases. In 2024, I was involved in 219 divorce cases. Year to date, here are we, March or April 29th, I'm at about 86 divorce cases. 1 in 10 of the clients that I've been retained would have been left exposed and uncovered had I not addressed this. So that is, and that's just the real property itself. And then we've also got to look at what's going on. I know we trust our spouse, but sometimes liens get placed on the property that the other spouse isn't aware of.
Yeah.
By the way, that's going to present an issue when you do refine it and the divorce judgment comes down. That lien can be then attached to the house and you as the owner. So we want, as the new sole owner. So we want to address that. And then the property taxes. Sometimes the other spouse isn't aware that they're behind in the property taxes. And that's a nice little surprise when you go to refinance the home. So that's just on the real property itself. Then we're going to take a look at the current mortgage. Are you on the mortgage or are you not on the mortgage? You know, what happened during, as you know, during the pandemic when rates were at historical lows, we had this, thing called COVID and all kinds of economic activity was going on to try to keep things afloat while the rates were low. So unless people were living under a rock, they refinanced and now they're at the 2s and the 3 mortgages. Fast forward, they're getting divorced today and they say, I can't afford to go from a 3% mortgage to a 7% mortgage.
No.
I don't want to take that payment shock. I say, I get it. So we're going to take a look at, does it make sense for you to maybe do one of 2 types of loan assumptions? Because there's 2 types of loan assumptions. Most know one, just about everyone else doesn't know the other one. So I advise and facilitate on either one of the loan assumptions, because that might be in their best interest.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't, believe it or not. Last Tuesday, we just closed a case where the divorce was finalized. The gentleman was retaining the marital home. He had a 2.99% mortgage. And he said, Don, I don't want to walk away from this thing. I said, I wouldn't either. But let's take a look at everything else, because that's just one aspect of your whole financial picture. Well, when all said and done, we were able to, he had some other debt obligations that were involved. So we were able to actually consolidate that debt, get the language we needed in the marital settlement agreement. And so from a cash flow standpoint, he went from a 2.99% mortgage to a 7%, yet his monthly cash flow improved by $456 a month.
Wow.
And then we take a look at I mentioned earlier, the tax implications. Well, the IRS, when you fill out, we just had our, April 15th, we just paid our friends at the IRS. Our tax filing status can either be married, single, or head of household. Well, most people overlook the fact that their filing status is going to change from married to either head of household or single. And so when we do our taxes, the IRS says, look, you can take a standard deduction or you can itemize certain allowable expenses. And in the context of the conversation that we had, that includes your mortgage interest expense and your property taxes. So
Mhm.
what we do is we actually break it down. Okay, here's what the standard deduction is. Here's what the potential itemized expenses are for your mortgage interest expense and your property taxes. Well, in this gentleman's situation, as long as the IRS allows that, as long as it's for homeownership acquisition indebtedness, which in the case of buying out your former spouse, that's exactly what it is. We check that box. His estimated savings next year and for tax savings is going to be about $8,557. I know these numbers just because we just did it Tuesday.
Yeah.
But that's significant. That's going from a 3%, 2.9 to a 7%. So that's why I would say, let's take a look, see what's
Yeah.
the best. So that's just the mortgage. And then we take a look at the most frustrating aspect, Lee, for any um, divorcing homeowner is especially if, let's just say, many times I'm working with the wife that's going to traditionally want to keep the marital home.
Mhm.
And so maybe she left the workforce to be the primary caregiver for the children. Maybe she's going to be relying on support income, child support alimony, which we do use. But there are very clear guidelines that we have to adhere to that oftentimes when the settlement agreement is drafted up, it's just not going to work. So I was just involved in a mediation in Orlando where the proposed alimony payments didn't have sufficient continuance that would be considered qualifying income in the eyes of the underwriter. So
Yeah.
had they drafted that up, had they signed the settlement agreement, had they gotten the final judgment, and had it gone to a traditional mortgage originator, they would have looked at it saying, well, can't use it. So that's where I get involved on the front end saying, okay, we're going to utilize it, but here's how we need the language I need in that settlement agreement to make sure we can use it. Then we take a look at, hey, listen, there's a retirement account, employer sponsored employment account, like a 401k or they're
Yeah.
rare these days, but a pension. Those days of I worked for General Motors for 25 years, I got a pension. Those days are gone. But from time to time we come across them. Well, we can use that, but it does require coordination prior to the final judgment, prior to uh, getting that retirement account divided. And then where it gets really interesting and where we can be very strategic is with marital debt. You know, they'll have credit cards together, they'll have car payments together, they'll have maybe student loans. So oftentimes there'll be situations where I was involved in a case where a couple came to me, they had talked to their traditional mortgage originator. The mortgage originator said the retaining spouse's debt to income ratio, it's a big component. How much money is going out relative to how much is coming in. So that's a big component. So the debt to income ratio is too high. And
Mhm.
she said, well, my attorney said I should talk to you. So I looked at it and I said, your mortgage originator, traditional mortgage originator is absolutely correct. It's too high. So I said, why don't you tell me a little bit what's going on? Now it was a very amicable divorce.
Right.
So the vacating spouse, Lee said, okay, it was the vacating spouse's mortgage. And the vacating spouse said, I want her to have the home. And so the retaining spouse debt to income ratio was too high. I said, okay, what's going on? What kind of debts do you have over here? Well, their situation was the vacating spouse, it was the vacating spouse mortgage, the retaining spouse during the marriage, their agreement was anything they did to the house. So they put on a roof, windows, maybe some solar, and there's some credit card debt.
Yeah.
So we were able to, with language in the MSA, in the marital settlement agreement, able to structure it in such a way that those debts weren't counted against the vacating spouse. And in
Mm.
essence, bringing the retaining spouse's debt to income ratio within guidelines to be able
Nice.
to go ahead and keep the house for her. So
Yeah.
again, it's just beyond the purview of your traditional mortgage originator because their model is traditional purchases, traditional finances, and they're very successful at it.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. I think like when I went through my divorce in preparation for mediation, I got a CMA from a real estate agent on the house. My ex got an appraisal, and then we ended up kind of coming in the middle for the amount for the house. But before I went to mediation, I knew I would need a new roof. And so I got estimates for the roof. And I feel like the more information you have, and both of you are willing to account for all those different ins and outs, the more you can make like very educated decisions in that mediation for the settlement agreement. And coming back to what you said early on, when you're going through a divorce, you're, almost in fight or flight mode. And the ability to think super clearly and plan in advance the way you might in your regular everyday life is you're just not there sometimes. And so having someone help you think through, okay, you need to get the CMA and organize that, a month before mediation so that you have time, like thinking all the things in advance is
Mhm.
the guidance that you need because sometimes you just cannot put it all together when you have so
Oh,
many.
no. In fact, I remember, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a family, I forget which family law conference it was, and there was a psychologist talking about the prefrontal cortex. Now,
Yes.
the prefrontal cortex during traumatic times is kind of knocked offline. So sound decision making is just not really
Yeah.
an option.
Yeah.
Um, and then when she said that, I'm like, oh my God, that was me. My brain was in such a fog.
Yes.
And that's why it wasn't until when I walked out of court, I thought, I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm like, what just happened?
Yeah.
The attorney said, well, you're now divorced. I'm like, I know, but that was just so fast. I didn't know what happened. It wasn't until a few months later I realized, whew, I really made a lot of mistakes that I wish someone had advised me
Mm-hmm.
in terms
Yeah.
of
And
yeah,
I think that's a lot of people who get into a field like divorce, which some people are like, why would you want to work with people going through divorce? But you learn so much from your process and
yeah,
you recognize how many things can go wrong. And especially if you feel like you've kind of regained your footing, and then you're like, I want to help other people so that they don't make some of these same mistakes or can go through it slightly more gracefully and or give them the belief that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Like that's how a lot of people end up working to help people who have already are once you've gone through your own experience.
yeah, yeah. And believe me, I've had other loan officers say, how do you deal with it? I'm like, first of all, it's not like I'm sitting here as a therapist and I got a box of tissues here. They, it's just, but it's very fulfilling. Like I said, 25 years in the financial services industry, and I'll call a spade a spade. The first 20, I was a commodity. I mean, if they didn't like the financial product that I had, they could get it from
Yeah.
15 people behind me.
Mm,
But with this, without sounding hokey, it's very rewarding
yeah.
knowing that I'm helping someone avoid the very same pitfalls that I fell in.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to take my financial acumen with real world, real life experience and
Mhm.
saying, let
Yeah.
me, yeah, it's cool. It's really cool.
Yeah. It is. And I think a lot of people, don't realize that there are so many creative ways to make things work if you have the right information
Right.
and the right professionals. Like I in my divorce, I was worried that I wouldn't I was going to keep the house, but I didn't think that my finances right away would get me to be able to refinance in my name. And my
Mm,
ex and I, it wasn't a pretty divorce, but we weren't at each other's throats. And there was enough trust there that we kept the mortgage in his name for 3 years, but I was responsible for paying it. And
mm,
then we refinanced into my name. And I know that's not traditional, but that we put that all in our marriage settlement agreement and we both followed through. And I think if people have professionals who can help them think through all the different options that so that it can work for the best situation of the family and the
mm,
family being the best for the kids. And if both parents are doing well and thriving because they've made smart decisions that support the family, even if it's a different shape than it was, you're helping your kids. And I think that good professionals helping good, smart people who stay in their adult brains to think
Mhm.
through what's best for the family for the long term can come up with really good creative solutions to optimize the family's assets.
Right, right. And and I think a lot of attorneys are now more receptive, especially here in Florida. Now, other parts of the country, I have colleagues, there's about 300 of us across the country. Other states are the family law community is not as engaging
Mm,
of allied professionals as they are here in Florida.
interesting.
So I know I'm very fortunate, in
Mm,
that regard. I've got a colleague of mine, and I think she's in Washington, and they won't, and she's an attorney as well, and they will not allow her in their collaborative group. I
wow.
know, I know. So we're very fortunate here with the state of Florida and the attorneys here.
Hmm. So bringing up collaborative, Don and I met in the collaborative divorce group for the Orlando area. And my question for you, you obviously probably see and help people who are going through a collaborative divorce process and then work with people going through the more traditional litigation process. What differences would you say based on your experience seeing both?
So, and I'm very involved with collaborative, and serve on the board for the state the Florida Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the FACP. So very involved. And I say that because many of the board members will even tell you, and local practice groups, collaborative is not necessarily for everybody.
Mhm.
It's a great model.
Yeah.
I think it's a healthier model. Um, but in terms of, the trick for those of your audience, you have your traditional divorce model, which call it the litigated model, where well, there's different models. You've got that, I believe the first one is the kitchen table where you and your spouse can sit down and hash things out and just do it that way. Or you can have a mediator come in
Yeah.
and guide you to that, draft up the marital settlement agreement, and then have that final judgment. Or the litigated model where both of you get representation. And then the collaborative model where it's a team approach. So each spouse has a representation with an attorney. Then there is the mediator, which is called a facilitator. And then, as opposed to both parties hiring a financial neutral, which is typically not all the time, but typically a forensic accountant. Um,
Hmm.
then that'll serve as the financial neutral. So that financial neutral doesn't have any vested interest, either the party. The only vested interest is that marital balance sheet and what's going to be the equitable distribution for both parties. So yeah, I'm a fan of the collaborative model. With that said, sometimes it's just not a good fit
Yeah.
depending on situations. So did that answer your question?
Yeah. So essentially, or you're saying based on the family situation,
Mhm.
it might be a good fit and that works, but sometimes mediation alone or litigated just two attorneys is enough to get people through a mediated divorce.
Right. And the key with the collaborative process, it requires full transparency by both parties. And
Yes.
if they're not going to be transparent, then I got news for you. Chances are it's not going to be a successful model for you.
Yeah. And I just want to add in the collaborative process, there's usually also the mental health neutral to help
Right.
with the parenting plan.
Right.
Yeah. So another question, there's a huge rise in silver divorces, divorces like 55 and over. Yes. Um, is that, would you consider like reverse mortgages with a situation like that? Have you seen an increase in that approach?
I have, and for whatever reason, I'm not qualified to answer why that there's a rise in the silver or the gray hair divorce, whether it's 50 plus, 60 plus, whatever it is. But I do know that's the largest group in terms of filing for divorce. And yes, the reverse is a good fit for certain situations. There was a case I was involved on. I've done a few of them, and there was a case that comes to mind where the couple was he was in his early 70s and she was in her late 60s, and the assets were being divided. And he said, I'm concerned about my longevity and outliving my income. And so with the reverse mortgage, traditional mortgage, let's just say you buy a $400,000 house and you have a $300,000 mortgage. And so you're paying down that mortgage every month. You're paying down that balance. Reverse mortgage is the reverse. There is no payment. In essence, it's all based on the amount of equity in the home.
Mm.
And traditionally, credit scores and income aren't an issue. So it's age. So it's an actuarial base based on whatever that actuarial table is, and then how much equity is in the home, and they'll give you a mortgage based on that. So that, as opposed to paying down the mortgage, when you get a reverse, it's accruing, it's going up. So then when you sell the home and right size or pass on to the happy hunting grounds, if the home is sold, whatever is accrued is paid off, and then beneficiaries receive whatever proceeds are left over. So now they're still responsible for property taxes and homeowners insurance, but there is no mortgage payment. So,
Right.
and there can even be a cash benefit as well. There's been cases where someone even had cash reserves that they could tap if they wanted. So for the right individual, it can be a very effective solution.
Mm. Really cool. So let's say they're hearing this and they're like, yeah, but I'm sure maybe a CDLP is gonna cost a lot more. How do you get uh, make money? And is it more expensive than using their traditional mortgage broker? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you it's going to be costlier on average to use your traditional mortgage originator because, again, what's beyond their purview of traditional underwriting guidelines, beyond their purview of the tax planning and the implications, beyond their purview of other aspects of the real property that they're not going to address that could
Mm,
cost tens of thousands of dollars. So I could go through the whole list and say, this could cost you, this could cost you, this could cost you. Or you make a nominal investment of less than $1,000 to retain me to guide you
mm,
to avoid these very, very costly mistakes that will be missed by your
mm.
traditional mortgage originator. And I know I've been through it. Divorce isn't cheap, and the last thing you want to do is to have to pay another professional. But if there was a in your room there, if there was a machine on that wall, and I said, "Hey Lee, go put a few $100s in that machine, and then when this divorce process is over, and at the end of the year, it's going to kick out a few $1,000s," would you do it?
Right.
So it's an investment. It's not when you say cost, it's not an investment. And I get it. Believe me, attorneys, what's divorce mortgage planning? What's the CDLP?
Yeah.
Judges, what's divorce mortgage planning? What's the CDLP? That's on us. That's on us from the Divorce Lending Association to create the awareness. That's my number one challenge.
Yeah.
So did I make that
Yeah, no, that was
understandable?
very clear, and I think it makes a lot of sense. It's
Yeah.
like you're investing a little bit now to potentially save a lot of money in the future.
And it just hit home. This was probably a month ago. I have a lot of windshield time because I travel all around. I was in Tampa last week. I'll be in Lauderdale for a conference last week in Tampa, conference for the Florida Bar Family Section in Lauderdale this weekend. Next weekend is the FACP conference in Delray. So I do travel a lot, and I'll never forget. I got a call from someone, and they said, "Hey Don, mediator gave me your name and a couple other names of mortgage professionals." So this gentleman told me what his situation was, and when he told me, I said, um, "I want you to ask your spouse if you can do this, if your spouse says no, then that's door number one. I call it door number one, door number two, door number three. I said, door number one, I want you to talk to your spouse. See if, in this case, see if she'll agree to this. If she says no, and chances are she might say no, I want you to go to door number two. Behind door number two is, who's your current loan servicer? And he told me, I said, I want you to call that loan servicer, ask them this, see if they'll do this. And so I said, and if door number one gets shut, if door number two gets shut, then I'm behind door number three. If then call me. I said, before we go down that rabbit hole. He said, well,
Yeah.
the other person I called said I had to fill out a loan application and do a refinance. I would never disparage another professional, but again, when I say it's beyond their realm of expertise, it's definitely beyond their realm of expertise. That would have cost them.
Yeah.
So, all right, I
Makes
pat myself on the back enough.
Yeah, yeah. And I like that giving them doors. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, try this, try that. Because maybe if door number one says yes and it's an easy, quick solution, you don't need a planner. But if it's a little more complicated, it might make sense
yeah,
to do that.
yeah.
So my last area of curiosity is, can you explain what it means to an equity buyout and what are the steps to do an equity buyout and do the pre-approval process? Could you just talk to that a little bit?
Lee, that's an excellent question. And it's funny you bring that up because part of my continuing legal ed or CLE lectures that I give across the state, that's one of my slides.
Hmm.
What's an equity buyout? And the reason is that term creates a lot of confusion
Yeah.
for everyone involved because it sounds like it's a purchase and it's not. The
Mm,
equity buyout is just the legal aspect, the process of one spouse obtaining the ownership interest of the other spouse.
okay.
And that's in lieu of what's called a refinance. Now, so that's the equity buyout. You're simply obtaining the ownership interest of your ex, soon to be ex-spouse via a refinance. Now, when it comes to refinance, there's two primary types of refinances. There's what's called a cash out refinance, and there's what's called a no cash out refinance. Pretty slick, huh? Now, and I should state that that equity buyout, whether let's just say the wife, we're working with the wife and she wants to keep the home. Let's say she's not on the mortgage. It's fine. It's still a refinance. It doesn't have to be a purchase. So there's two types of refinances. There's what's called that cash out, and then there's the no cash out. Well, how we're trained as loan originators to do it one particular the cash out refinance. And it makes sense, right? Hey, you're gonna be paying, you're coming to me, come to my office, you need a mortgage, you're in a divorce, you're paying your ex-spouse, yeah, we're gonna do a cash out refinance. However, two issues with that. We're limited to the amount of equity we can loan on. It's very limited, which can prevent, and there's been several situations where that was the sticking point and kind of the roadblock for the case moving forward because they were only going to a certain amount of equity in the cash out refinance. And in the mortgage world, because everything goes back to risk, the cash out refinance has higher financing terms.
Mm,
Whereas the alternative is what's called a no cash refinance. It's called a rate and term in our industry, because it's simply, for example, during the pandemic, people said, hey, we got a 6% mortgage. Now we see they're down to 3%. We don't need to pull cash out. We just want to get a lower monthly payment. So they refinance for a lower rate and a specified term, 15, 20, 30 years, thus rate and term. But there's no cash being pulled out. However, if I get the language I need, and with that, I should state that we can access much more equity with the rate term refinance than the no cash out. And it's got better financing terms. So as long as I'm involved early enough, I'm going to work with the attorneys. I'm going to get the language I need in the marital settlement agreement to where I can consider it the more ideal refinance, the no cash out, even though we're pulling cash out.
mm,
And believe me, I've had underwriters say, you can't do it. I'll say, respectfully, here's the little known guideline. I had a case, I'll never forget, it was in Daytona. And Again, they talked to their traditional mortgage originator. Again, they said, oh, they said we could only get 80% of the. I said, I get it. Worked with the attorneys, got the language I needed. I went up to like 96%. And our underwriter said, no, it's got to be this. I said, respectfully, here you go. Didn't, oh, okay, signed off on it. Didn't stop there. Then I went to the title attorney, and it was an FHA loan. So FHA is the government insured loan, which falls under the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. So the title attorney gets it, and he calls me. He says, Don, HUD's pushing back on us. They're not letting me do it. I said, why is that? And he says, well, they say it's got to be this type of cash out. I said, let me get to the office. So I sent him the guidelines. 2 weeks later, it was like 10 days later, he calls. He said, are you in your office? I said, no. He said, check your email. I said, why? He said, I've never seen this before in all my years. I guess HUD is in Oklahoma City. They got the guidelines that I supplied and they approved it. So point is, if your underwriters of the world aren't aware of it, if your FHAs and the HUD representatives aren't aware of their own guidelines, what are the
Wow.
chances of your traditional mortgage originator? Again, it's
Yeah.
beyond their purview.
Right.
So that's the equity buyout process.
Hmm. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked? Oh, I have one other question. This we might have covered this somewhat, but what is a mortgage assumption very like the same, or that's a whole separate process?
I do part of what I do is because what I do is I think you're picking up goes well beyond traditional mortgage origination. It's far beyond it. A lot of what I do is mortgage assumption facilitation.
Okay.
So in fact, when we're done, I'm going to be with a woman who we're doing what's called a qualified loan assumption with her loan servicer. So that's where this particular bank will we're going to be I'm be facilitating her in that process where in essence they're going to it's her husband's mortgage. So she is going to this bank servicer is going to be qualifying her based on her credit worthiness and financial ability to repay the loan, but this time she is the borrower. And
Hmm.
so if we're successful in that, then the goal is, and they typically do, but every servicer is different. Typically, because it's like a three something more, I'd have to look at it, but it's in the threes.
Hmm.
And ideally, they will honor the current terms of the loan, including the rate. So that
Oh,
is the qualified loan assumption.
huh.
There's another type of loan assumption that just wasn't an option for it. It is for some, but it's not. So, and that other loan assumption, typically there's some, the objection from the vacating spouse is that they may not be able to qualify for future mortgage financing. And again, as long as I get language in the settlement agreement, that will overcome that objection.
Hmm.
So, so that, yeah, that it's big right now, obviously. Hey, most, again, unless they're living under a rock, they've got that low mortgage during the
Yeah.
pandemic,
Yeah.
and why
Having to go
I don't
from,
need to give them a mortgage, right? So
yeah.
yeah, so that's the assumption. It's big, and let's just you just have to know which one to pursue.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all this information. It's so helpful. I think it just makes people realize that there are so many options and you just need the right information to make the right decisions. And sometimes you need to rely on professionals who can help you because it's a lot to get your head around and there are so many pieces. So
I
I,
told you I could talk about this. That's why I said how much time, because I can go on. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I go to law firms. In fact, last week I was at a law firm downtown Orlando, and it was a beautiful office, big conference room, a lot of attorneys in there. And he said, "Wow, that was a lot." I said, "Well, here's the beauty. You don't have to memorize all this stuff. You just have
Mhm.
to know a guy.
Right.
Call that guy.
Yeah.
I can introduce you to one if you need one."
Yeah. Well, I will put all your information in the description of the YouTube interview. And if you want to, if there's like a social media handle or a website you want to share here.
It's very easy. It's thedivorcemortgageguy.com. So if you go to thedivorcemortgageguy.com or Google my name, Don Moll, Moll. I don't handle it. There's couple of women in the office that they're the gurus on that. So apparently when you put my name in, it pops up there and it's not a mugshot.
Yes,
Um,
that's a
so
good
yeah.
thing. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time and thank you for everything you're doing to
Thanks
help.
for having me. This is fun.